Great game, Tommy.
My name is Jayson Brown. You can find me on Twitter at BrownJayson. Joined by the full gang this evening here with Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus. What's going on, Eric?
Hey, how's it going? Good win by the Vikings last night.
We will take all the wins. I don't know if I'll call it good, but we will take the wins. We will definitely take them. That first half was painful. I saw
anytime
someone.
Anytime you can get Gus Ferrata a quarterback win, though. I mean, that's a good win, I think.
He didn't get the quarterback win, though. Sam Bradford, he left the game with a 3-2 lead. So Sam Bradford actually leaves that game with the quarterback win.
9-8 all time in his career as a Vikings starter, finally above 500.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Oh, wow, he could stay there. That could be it.
Yeah, and JR hit the master troll this morning saying that Sam doesn't play another game for the Vikings. This 2-0 season will be his first above 500 season of his career.
God, it's savage.
Which was just savagery. But let's move things along here. Luke, what's going on here? On with our man Luke from Purple PTSD. What's going on, Luke? How's it going?
Going well. Might still sound a little stuffy, but I promise I'll get healthy soon.
Okay. So where were you this weekend? Because I know that you'd mentioned that you were traveling, and then the Purple PTSD account let us know that it wouldn't be live tweeting. So what was all that about?
Yeah, I was on a flight during the actual game, so I was watching it on one of those little TV screens. But I went to a wedding in New York.
Fun.
You guys want to hear a funny story about a flight?
Oh boy.
Yes.
Do it.
So when the Vikings lost to the Seahawks in the playoffs 2 years ago, I was flying home from Seattle starting about the second quarter of that game, and I was on the one Delta flight seemingly that didn't have Wi-Fi access. So I found out about that game from the pilot about halfway through my flight from Seattle to Minneapolis. And then, of course, I landed, and then everybody told me what actually happened, which was Blair Walsh missing the field goal wide left. So that experience is actually not as traumatic for me as I think for most Vikings fans, because I didn't actually experience it in the moment.
That's actually the game that helped me put sports, I think, in their proper perspective. Blair has a chance to win the game, and he misses it, and I am devastated. But I'm so into the game, I'm not really thinking about the fact that, I'm a father of 2 young children, and my daughters were petrified. Like, oh my God, what happened to Daddy? Is Daddy okay? And I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. I can't be scaring my children whenever I watch one of these games. And now I'm able to, bad things. We were watching the first half of the game, and I was just laughing. And my wife is like, this is awful football. Why is it so funny? I'm like, I don't know. I just can't take it as seriously anymore. Kind of after that moment when I realized that I was probably giving everyone in my family anxiety every time I watched the Vikings game. So had to ease up a little bit. But go ahead.
I think most intelligent sports fans, right? They always have that moment they can point back to where they're like, I had this epiphany that I needed to stop being a huge rube about football. and I think we all have that moment, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if I can pin back, but I know if you listen to KFAN in the Twin Cities, Dan Cole, the common man, totally, it was this missed field goal that kept Detroit out of the playoffs or something, where he just looked himself in the mirror and said, what the heck, So that's cool that you can pinpoint that one time as the time your football fandom turned around or something.
Yeah,
I'm just mad that the game-winning field goal against the Bears wasn't exactly a 27-yarder. It was 26, and I'm really sad about it.
I'm not gonna lie, I was terrified waiting for that kick to happen. Like I was
so
legitimately worried before that kick happened. I was like, please don't. Like mostly because I didn't want overtime of that game, but yeah, I was nervous that Cobra Kai was gonna go out there and pull a Blair Walsh on us and force us to watch more of that offensive explosion yesterday in that game.
Truly,
Well,
overtime in
Bears,
that game would have been a disaster for everyone involved.
But if you're the Bears, right? Like, I mean, this is, I guess, an analytics question, similar to the Cowboys, Packers game too, though. Like, I think you let the Vikings score a touchdown there, right? Because
that's a really interesting question.
You don't have any timeouts, right? The Bears were basically praying for a missed 25-ish yard field goal, which happens, what, 1 out of every 10 times? So you lose the game, right? 90% of the time by playing the way that they did. And granted, like, the Vikings had the ball at about 1:20, right? That was and that first handoff to McKinnon, if you open the floodgates for him and let him score, you have 1:15, and yeah, you got to go drive down and get a touchdown, but there's higher odds of doing that in 1:10 than getting a field goal with 10 seconds left, right? So it was weird, but the whole time, and granted, I kind of wanted the Vikings to cover the spread, but I was like, I was like, don't you just let them score here? But nobody's really.
Counterpoint.
Do you think John Fox has ever opened a math book, or at least in the last 40 years has he opened a math book?
He was about to make the right decision on 4th and 2 from like the Vikings 40 and decided, nah, we're gonna get a delay game out of a timeout. Like
that was an amazing sequence. So
terrible.
if you open the floodgates for Jarrett McKinnon and let him go, doesn't he just slide down at the 5 and then you take knees and you just gave him the easiest thing ever?
McKinnon's definitely going into the end zone.
That was so. You remember Ahmad Bradshaw in the Super Bowl against the Patriots, right? Like the Patriots let them score, and Ahmad Bradshaw, like, instead of like he tried to like lean over at the 1 yard line and like had momentum and just like fell into the end zone on accident, right? Like, and I think I think the Vikings are in similar straits, to be quite honest with you. Like, I don't think they're telling, hey, McKinnon, if they let you score, take a knee at the 1. Frankly, right. I don't think
and that's a conversation in and of itself too.
But I think, like, okay, so if you start from the assumption that Forbath's going to make that kick 90% of the time, which I think is an underestimate, right?
Right.
Then, you have only a 10% chance of even getting into overtime with that approach. And then you have basically a 50-50 chance of winning the game. You have a 5% chance of winning that game with that approach. I'm assuming you have more than a 5% chance of driving down and scoring a touchdown, right? With 1:10, and possibly starting maybe at the 25 if the Vikings kick a deep,
absolutely
kickoff. I mean, to me, it just makes too much sense, especially when you don't have timeouts. If you have timeouts, then yeah, force the field goal, take timeouts. But the Bears had 1 timeout left because John Fox is a genius, right? And like, to me, that just doesn't make any sense because the other team just drains clock. And that was like in the Dallas Green Bay game too. This was kind of on the other side of the coin, but it was 2nd and 2, I think, from like the Green Bay 10. Dallas is down by 4. And Dak throws an incompletion to Dez Bryant. No timeouts. Green Bay doesn't have to take a timeout to stop the clock there. Next play, Dak scores, which is like the perfect thing that could have happened for Green Bay then. And then the Green Bay's got 1:10 left, no timeouts, and Aaron Rodgers does what he does, right? So I don't know. I'm not actually conflicted. I think the right move was to let the Vikings score there by the Bears, but of course they're not thinking that deeply, I guess.
Yeah, I guess if you can trust that a guy like Jarrett McKinnon isn't gonna just like take a knee at the 1 and then just kill the clock anyways, like you didn't want him to, then totally, I'm all for that because you need to get the ball back to win the game, no matter what the score is.
Yep. And the probability of making a 19-yard field goal is basically the same as making a 27-yard field goal. So to me, it's like you give them the opportunity, you give the Vikings an opportunity to make a mistake and score a touchdown, basically. And so I would have done it, but I guess with Forbath the way he's been recently, I think you maybe could understand the thought process there, but I still think even even when he's bad at extra points, which he is, he's still somewhere in the 85 to 90% range on those kicks. So
Tough stadium
even
to kick into.
yeah, even then, I think you're still. I think it was a sucker play by the Bears last night at the end of that game.
I'm wondering now that you brought this up, though. So on the one hand, John Fox and them letting him score, I really would be curious to know if that was if anyone on our team told Jarek not to run into the end zone in that situation, because that's the other side of that is that I'd be really, really curious to know that, like, if it opened up for you, Jarek, were you going in? My fantasy teams would have been very, very happy because I'm a Jerick McKinnon truther and have him stashed in all my money leagues, so I would have been quite happy to go ahead and score, because I also didn't have no faith that Mitchell Trubisky was driving them all the way back. But yeah, I would be curious to know the other side of that, because I mean, we don't always make the smartest analytical type decisions from a Vikings perspective. So I'd be interested if they'd coached the team up on the other side of that, especially after the fake punt.
I guess it's back of the envelope calculation though, right? Like, okay, assuming there's only a 10% chance he's missing it, then there's a 5% chance that approach leads to a win for the Bears. So basically you're making the calculation that if the Bears drive down and score a touchdown, then there's a 50% chance that they win the game because the game goes in overtime, assuming they don't kick or go for two, which is also basically a 50-50 proposition. So basically John Fox is telling me he doesn't think that out of 20 last-second drives with no timeouts and 1:10 left, that they can score one time. Like, I don't see that. To me, like, they just didn't calculate that, right? There's not somebody in the Bears front office or whatever doing these, and it makes sense, right? Like, there's so many decisions within a football game. You're look at it, you're like, gosh, these guys did not think this situation through ahead of time. To me, just seems, I don't know, interesting. Sort of impromptu analytics talk right here.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. Well, I guess we'll get to the not so impromptu analytics talk with that extra smooth segue right there of talking about something that gets people a little riled up. Maybe not as riled up as Pro Football Focus grades, but I mean, you guys do a version of them, so they get people pretty upset as well. And Eric, this is one of the things that I know that you put a lot of work into is the power rankings over at Pro Football Focus, and there's a lot of different ways power rankings can be put together. So I guess I'll pass it over to you to allow you to explain to us why it is you do all this work to make all of us so upset every week.
Yeah. That's a great, segue too, because of our discussion a couple weeks ago about the grades and how, thinking about, how do opponent adjust grades, for example, if we were ever thinking about doing that, in order to do stuff like that, you actually need to have some sort of idea about the strength of the team that you're playing, right? Or the strength of the team that you are. So, and there are a couple there's many different ways to go about doing this. So one of the things for PFF that we do every single week is we publish what are called our PFF ELO ratings. And ELO, the guy's name is Arpod ELO. And this he made this method for chess about 75 years ago, I believe. But for football, basically the idea is that you have a matchup between two teams. They have their strengths, and basically, you find out what the outcome of that game is and what it is relative to the strength of the team beforehand. So, for example, if the Vikings are playing the Bears, the Vikings are 3.5-point favorites last night, and the Vikings win by 3, then the Bears kind of are outplayed their their expectation. The Vikings kind of underplayed their expectation. And so you kind of you assign certain ELO points to one team or the other, and that's kind of the way that it goes about it. Now the PFF focus that we have is we take our PFF grades, and instead of using the scores of the games, what we do is we make an algorithm that basically rescores the game based upon the grades. And so, for example, last night we actually had the score of last night's game basically being like 17-17 or 18-17 or something like that, because the Bears somewhat outplayed the Vikings in many aspects of that game, especially the Bears defense against the Vikings offense. So that's kind of like the flavor that we add to it. So if a team like Detroit isn't grading well the entire season, then this rating system will reflect that we expect them to kind of regress to the mean the next year. and so on and so forth. So that's kind of one way to go about doing it. Now, there are other ways called like the Massey rankings, which I think people have heard of. There's also like a Keener ranking system. Rufus Peabody's done some work kind of adjusting Massey's ratings and stuff like that. But the one that we've kind of focused on are the ELO ones because, I like the fact that it's an iterative thing. And we know that football, while momentum isn't like a first order thing, it's certainly a second order thing. And, playing a team really well in week 17 is certainly different than playing them really well in week 2, for example. So that's kind of where we're at. And we know that it irritates a lot of fans, mostly Lions fans, which is a good thing. But that's what we've been working on all offseason. We publish them every week. Coming in, it'll come up tomorrow. The Vikings are 14th going into week 6.
I like the idea of like not using like it's extremely objective with that. It's just the data and that's what it spits out. And that means that like if you have a problem with it, you can add, appropriate context and like, say, well, they didn't jump up as much as they should have for this game, but that was because of this and that reason, and it affected the math this way. Whereas when you get something like the more mainstream power rankings, which are just pretty much subjective, like what this writer thinks, it's a lot harder to argue or really have like productive discourse about it, because it's like, no, I don't think the Lions are that good. And then you're just kind of, okay, and then you're at an impasse, and it doesn't really like foster as much discussion, in my opinion, as something like ELO or some of the other, like, or even something like DVOA, something that's a little bit more rooted in objectivity, where if you do have a problem with it, you can usually diagnose and point to like where the discrepancy is.
Yeah, and the thing that I like the most about something like ELO, especially ELO, is that there are prior distributions that are associated with stuff, and it takes a while for the prior distribution to be overtaken by what's happened. So going into the season, we had Pittsburgh as our 3rd highest rated team. They're 8th currently, and we had Jacksonville somewhere like 29th or 30th. They're 19th currently, right? And the thing about that I like about it is, you see a lot of these power rankings, and I think some of them have like Jacksonville, 12, top 12, top 10. And it's like react to 1/16 of the season that way when God knows they just lost to the Jets, right? And like, so you kind of have to think, yeah, of course they beat the Steelers, but there were, basically 3 defensive touchdowns in that game, if I'm remembering correctly. Or 2 defensive touchdowns and a long touchdown run. Like, that game was a lot closer than people realize, right? From a predictive perspective, like we're going to do a lot better having Jacksonville at 19th and making them prove it to us week by week, as opposed to putting them up at 8 and then freaking out when they lose to the Rams this weekend. That's what I really like about like analytics rooted power rankings, as opposed to, like you said, somebody's opinion.
Yeah, it's a lot more stable.
So with that, I guess, and because Luke brought it up, and it's one of the things that I was looking at kind of when you brought this topic up was kind of DVOA versus kind of the rankings that you guys are doing. And before the Lions matchup, and I was looking at kind of different places and how different people were viewing that particular matchup, and that really did stick out to me, that the Lions, from a early season DVOA perspective, I think they were a top 5 team at the time, whereas we were considerably lower down, but the Lions were also much lower down when we were looking at the other Pro Football Focus power rankings. So I guess, would you be able to help us understand a little bit of why there's such a wide gap between kind of your process and what DVOA was saying at that point of the season?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think with us, for example, we seed the ELO ratings with the previous year's ELO ratings kind of regress to the mean. So last season, actually, by virtue of the fact that Detroit won almost all their games within a possession, we actually had Detroit with like a 5-11 record last year, just because you take and in fact we were one of the ones who kind of signaled, hey, they're not that good at 9-4, and then they lost 4 straight games in the year. So they started the season somewhere in the upper 20s. And like I said earlier, like it was going to take a few games for them to actually like, cover up that prior assumption that they were 23rd. Whereas I think with DVOA, they start the whole season for scratch, right? So the fact that
They
Detroit
have both for DVOA because they have a separate column in DVOA.
Okay.
DAVE, which is that, but it like takes last year's prediction at a diminishing, like weighting it diminishing over the course of the season. So like by week 8 or so, it's gone. But at the beginning of the year, they use like last year's numbers.
Okay.
A lot.
Okay, so that's something that we do in some of our rankings. For example, our Massey, the stuff that goes into our predictions where we use for spread picks and things like that. So, because I think that's a good thing to do. You got to be careful, obviously, because rosters change and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So like we basically had a prove it approach to the Detroit Lions. And if you think about it, okay, Detroit played. They opening day they played Arizona and they were losing that game, and then a couple turnovers at the end really turned that game. But if you're thinking about it from a PFF perspective, play by play, if you're playing a game with 140 plays and three of the turnovers turn the game around, well, on a play per play perspective, those aren't that heavy, right? In terms of from the perspective of grades. Same thing happened against Atlanta in week 3. The Atlanta really kind of boat raced them a little bit, and Detroit just had 3 turnovers, right? So everybody looks at that game and like, oh, Detroit should have won. Well, I look at it and say, well, Detroit shouldn't have even been in that game to begin with, where the differing perspectives are. From, a value standpoint, of course, those turnovers really they're huge game changers. They're like double-digit expected point changes. Like if another team has the ball, they throw a pick 6, that you're losing 5 expected points on the offense's end, giving 7. That's a 12 points, swing. That's where like those value kind of metrics are probably going to like Detroit, digit positive, turnover rates and things like that. So for us, it's more that play by play, and we sort of view that as eventually that's going to converge to the truth. Early in the season, you get some things where I know I'm talking to my colleague George, and I'm like, oh gosh, why is Carolina 5th? Right? We were talking about that week 2. Why is Carolina 5th? Why is Carolina 5th? Well, okay, and a couple weeks later, you're like, oh, maybe Carolina is actually good. So, we doubted the math a little bit. In that case, our intuition was a little bit off. And now, we're thinking about other teams, and they're like, why is Cincinnati in the top 15? And like, is Cincinnati going to prove us wrong now? That kind of thing. So it's just, again, when you allow algorithms to do some things, you kind of have to trust that the things are working.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense there. I guess, Luke, did you have any final thoughts that you wanted to bring in terms of power rankings methodology? Anything that you like there, or just how generally angry you get when you see them?
I abhor power rankings. I've actually, on the other podcast that I do, the Purple Journal, I will always veto power rankings whenever Joe wants to bring them up. I'll be like, no, I'm not talking about that. Because I think that most mainstream power rankings are pretty much click grabs. They're pretty low effort articles and stuff. And I think unless you're going to start doing like, iterative measures and really, make an effort to successfully boil a team down to a number that you can then rank them by, I just don't think it's really worth anything analytically. But I do want to bring up the value of doing it play by play, which you touched on, Eric, but I want to go deeper into it because like football is a weird game. Like you can have a game where you had, if there's was there like 100 plays in a game or something like that, and you can be the better team on 80 of them, but then throw 2 pick sixes and lose. And so I think doing it on a play-by-play basis can help you like not overvalue something like I wonder what this Pittsburgh Jacksonville game is going to look like, where Ben Roethlisberger threw a bunch of turnovers, and I didn't watch the whole game, so I don't legitimately don't know like how the rest of his passes were. But like that might help be predictive, in a game where he doesn't throw 5 picks, what the rest of the passes look like are probably going to be a lot more predictive in terms of like how the Steelers are going to be looking forward. And right now the whole narrative surrounding Pittsburgh is, oh my God, is Ben Roethlisberger going to retire? Is he washed up? Is he a disaster? And I think that's, looking at the aggregate result, you can kind of lose some of the nuance where if you look at it play by play, you might get some better insights that are more stable and more predictive.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point about what the purpose of power rankings are. I agree that, somebody writing somebody writing an article with the power rankings not particularly, thought out. I mean, that's not necessarily adding a lot of value to the conversation. For us at PFF, the reason we made the power rankings was to be able to predict games better, right? And because we would like to, attract clients to our picks, right, and sell them for, have additional, PFF Elite and PFF Edge customers. That was really like our main focus. So for us, the power rankings are very much to handicap, games, and that's the purpose of it. Not necessarily to like piss off Lions fans or to tell Chiefs fans that their team's the best ever. It's more to say, okay, like how many, if the Vegas spread is 4.5 between Kansas City and Pittsburgh, and we have this one rating system, we have this other rating system, we have other rating systems which help us opponent adjust our grades. So we actually do opponent adjust grades when we're trying to predict stuff. That's really what that's for. And I think most people in the analytics community, I think all of us would agree that like that's a pretty valuable thing. Figuring out what you think the total of a game is going to be. If you're a fantasy football player, right, you want to load up your DFS lineups with teams in games where the Vegas sport total is 55 points as opposed to 40 points, right? And being able to handicap those numbers better is really, in my opinion, the value of the rating algorithms and the power rankings and things like that. That's really what they're for. That's been elicited by them. Yeah, I agree with you. Is a little rough to consume.
Yeah, and people really like it. There's a high demand for it. So I understand why you would want to say, okay, everybody wants a power ranking thing. Let's do a power ranking thing. But I think if you're going to do it and you're going to flaunt it as though it is, this is the ranking and this is which team is better than which team, which is also kind of a weird thing because you can have stuff like the Jacksonville Jaguars losing to the Jets and then beating the Steelers.
Are the Steelers good? Are the Steelers good?
No, I have no idea. They should be. We're
going off on tangent, but are they good? I don't know. It feels like they should be good. And I know as Vikings fans, we want them to be good because they beat us down. But are they good?
They have a good roster. I love their roster. I don't know.
Well, here's the thing, and actually this was something I listened to on Warren Sharp's show, but it makes some sense. Like Jacksonville is fantastic defensively. They have our highest PFF Massey defensive rankings for what that's worth. But there's a huge differential between how good they are in the passing game, right, with A.J. Boye, Jalen Ramsey, Barry Church, right, the Jonathan Cyprians. Like, they're fantastic as in the pass game. They're not so much so in the run game. And the weirdest thing that happened on Sunday was that game was close most of the game. And, former Chiefs head coach, current offensive coordinator Todd Haley only gave Le'Veon Bell 15 carries. And the success rate for, the Steelers running the ball was actually higher than them passing the ball that game, which of course makes sense given the opponent. But the game plan in that game made absolutely no sense. Pittsburgh dropping back and throwing a ton.
In scouting is what that sounds like.
Yeah, and to me, this is like first order stuff. You should look at this. I mean, if you're looking at the game this weekend between the Vikings and the Packers, and you're looking at the Packers defense, and you're not trying to spread them out and stretch them vertically, horizontally, make them put 6 safeties in the game and challenge the defensive backs, you're a complete buffoon, right? If you've even looked at Green Bay play, looked at their stats, that their secondary is uber vulnerable, right? And not only that, but they overcompensate by putting like 7 defensive backs on the field all the time, right? Leaving those running lanes. And so, like, there are just simple things, and it's amazing to me that Todd Haley, a Super Bowl offensive coordinator with the Cardinals about 10 years ago, a head coach in the league with the Chiefs, brought the Chiefs to the playoffs one year, can't even figure something like that out. That's just, to me, I don't get it.
And I think where that impact comes in, it's really interesting where that impact comes in terms of power rankings, because now the Steelers came out and they put up a stinker against a, classically bad team, even though Jacksonville has great defense and all that. Everybody thinks the Jacksonville Jaguars is still kind of one of the dregs of the league. And so you come out and put up a stinker against them. Now everything about that team is going to be underestimated for a while, even though, if you play that game 10 times and bring different game plans in, that's not going to happen every time that those two teams. If those two teams meet, say in the playoffs or something, because Jacksonville gets hot and wins the weak division or whatever, that probably
you bring up a great point. You bring up a great point in terms of like why we do this, right? So, for example, if you're trying to look at like handicapping games this weekend, Jacksonville's at home this week against the Rams. They're about a 2.5-point favorite. Is the market overreacting to Jacksonville whomping on Pittsburgh and the Rams looking like trash against Seattle? Is that point spread? Does that point spread indicate that, right? And like those are the really cool things that you can try to understand with power rankings, with analytics and things like that. If you watch the Rams game against Seattle, we did because it was one of our picks for PFF. The Rams had a touchdown by Todd Gurley where the ball got knocked out right at the very end, and they missed a field goal, like kind of a 35-yard field goal, and they turned the ball over twice in Seattle territory. So
and they still had a drop pass that could have sealed the game.
And they still could have won the game, right? Cooper Kupp hangs onto that ball, they win that game. And so, like, are we overreacting to the fact that a bunch of discrete outcomes caused the Rams to lose a game at home against Seattle? And then are we overreacting to the fact that, Jacksonville had a 21-point win against Pittsburgh, but 2 of those touchdowns were on interceptions, and Pittsburgh had a horrible game plan against them. Sean McVay for the Rams is, I would imagine, far better offensive mind than Todd Haley of the Steelers. Are we, Jacksonville's an 8.5-point dog against Pittsburgh. Do you really think that they improved? Let's assume the Rams and the Steelers are similar. Did they really improve 10 points in 1 week? Of course they didn't, right? So, having this kind of like power rankings that are sort of more conservative, that move kind of continuously as opposed to jaggedly, I mean, that's really where you can find value, whether it be DFS, whether it be sports betting, whether it just be, having interesting conversations with people either on Twitter or at the bar, like all those kinds of things. Like it just makes you a better consumer / observer of sports, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All I heard from that was that I need to play Todd Gurley in DFS this week.
I'm not going to play him.
Okay. Well, all right.
I guess I have one final question about it, because now I'm thinking about that Rams game. So with a play like that Cooper Kupp drop, you can probably correctly measure the value of stuff like a missed field goal or turnovers and all the kind of stuff that led up to it being, that situation. But with that play where, all right, if Cooper Kupp hangs on and they win, how do you measure the impact of that? Because I'm thinking about power rankings and like the discussions people have about it where they say, oh, the Rams almost beat the Seahawks and then they're one drop away from the Seahawks, but they went down in your power rankings. What's going on? And, we talked a lot about like why it might capture the game differently, but like with that specific play, how can you measure, I guess, the fact that it was like an almost? Does that just kind of naturally come in because obviously the Rams had like enough good plays defensively to keep them in the game? Is that, I guess, how that gets measured?
Yeah, I mean, the way the sausage is made with those is basically, and there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can literally go play by play to try to. We do it more so at the game level. So we have like, what was the total passing grade for a team? What was the total run grade? What was the total pass blocking? And then we use basically all of the historical data we've ever had and use it in a machine learning algorithm to predict what the score was. So basically the Cooper Kupp drop is going to be like a minus 0.5 or a minus 1 in the PFF system. And so, but all the plays that got them into that position might be little plus 0.5s or something for each individual player, right? But that drop is reflected in the grades, right? So it's not like we count it as a touchdown. You know what I'm saying? Fact that Aaron Donald had like an amazing game and Seattle's offensive line couldn't block him, that's worth maybe an extra point or two in the direction of the Rams in the final score. I can't remember. I have to look at what we thought the final score should have been based on grades or what the algorithm did. But I do know it was far closer than 6 points, which was the end result. I think it was something like 2 points or something, which then means that, Seattle goes up, Rams go down, but it's not it's not the same up and down that a 6-point win in the regular ELO system would elicit, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, the answer to the question is like, we use all of the historical data that we have, all of the grade distributions and how they've ever occurred, basically a machine learning algorithm. And so we just leverage the big data that we have and do it that way.
That's awesome.
That really is awesome. But I got nothing else. Luke, you got any more questions for Eric this evening?
No, I think that was all the thoughts I had.
Eric, you got any preview picks for us this week?
Oh man, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, but like I really like the Eagles -3.5 on Thursday night. I really like Denver -12 on Sunday. That's a big number, and usually you take a dog with that big a number. But the Denver defense back, they're 5 defensive backs, 6 defensive backs are about as good as they come. The Giants don't have any wide receivers left, literally. The Denver run defense is the top graded in the PFF system. The Giants can't run the ball. So I don't really know if the Giants cross the 50 on Sunday, to be honest with you. And then Denver runs the ball really well. Giants can't stop the run very well. So, plus the Denver's coming off a bye. They're at home, altitude. I really like that game.
All right. So what we've heard this week from Eric is Todd Gurley and CJ Anderson for all the money on DraftKings this week.
FTW. Yeah.
Well, all right then. Well, gentlemen, this was fun. Sorry to have missed last week. Glad to be back. Yeah, we'll do this again pretty soon. You guys have a good night.
Take care.
Cheers.